A couple of military flights from the United States to Colombia that were transporting 160 Colombian illegal migrants was turned around and sent back home. The Colombian government refused to let them land after giving them initial approval.
It's been a wild 24 hours and a very public showdown between President Trump and the president of Colombia. The Colombian president initially refused to accept deported migrants from the U.S. returning to their home country.
Specifically, Gustavo Petro, who is the president of Colombia, said that by chaining all of the detainees together by their hands and their feet in the plane was such a gross insult to the Colombian nation that they wouldn't be accepted.
And both countries began threatening tariffs against each other until a late-night deal was reached, and the White House is now declaring victory.
There's nothing really odd about chaining migrants together. I know this is going to sound weird, even if they're nonviolent, because basically you're putting 100 people in an enclosed space that is airborne where they outnumber the crew and say, we're sending you away from this country and you can't come back and you have to live there now. It's exactly the sort of environment that would generate a bit of a riot, and a riot on a plane ends badly. So immigration and in fact pretty much all law enforcement had been doing some version of this as long as we've been moving prisoners around on planes, especially if you're doing a lot of them. There's nothing from the American point of view that was out of the ordinary here. The real surprise came from the Colombian side, with Petrov throwing such an allergic reaction. Donald Trump had a very nice, calm response, as you might imagine, and immediately slapped a 25% tariff on everything that comes from Colombia and said that by the end of this coming week, it'll be up to 50%, and where it goes from there is up to Petro. Petro said, well, we're going to do the same to you. Also, status is being revoked for diplomats. The embassy is having its visa section closed. And the U.S. government is basically restricting travel by anyone who's working for the Colombian government at all. So it's pretty rough. We haven't done anything on this scale since the original breakout of the conflict in Vietnam 60 years ago. This is pretty heavy stuff.
Releasing a statement late last night, President Trump will continue to fiercely protect our nation's sovereignty, and he expects all other nations of the world to fully cooperate in the accepting the deportation of their citizens illegally present in the United States.
Eventually, some country was going to do something publicly that Trump just had an allergic response to, and an example would need to be made. The countries that have been kind of shortlisted so far are like Germany and Korea and Canada and Mexico. If you were to pick a big fight with one of those countries, Americans are going to feel, and they're going to feel it fast. And it would be ugly, and you would immediately trigger an inflationary recession in the United States, which could very quickly turn into something worse. And Donald Trump would then have the choice of retracting and looking like a bit of a fool, or doubling down and driving the American economy into the gutter at a time when we should be enjoying a reindustrialization boom. But Colombia is different. Colombia definitely falls into the second, third tier of countries, and most Americans, to the degree that they're even aware of the existence of Colombia, they think of Miami Vice and the cocaine trade from the 1980s. Colombia is a country that you can, I feel horrible saying this, drag through the streets, and most Americans are going to at least moderately approve. And so if you're going to pick a country to drag through the streets in order to prove that Donald Trump can walk the talk, Colombia is a really good choice. Someone who will, their wrecking will intimidate other countries into doing things Trump's ways in the future without giving anything a second thought. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, that I agree with that, because I see Colombia as one of the handful of countries that is indelible part of the American future. Its place in manufacturing supply chains at the moment are thin, but we already have a free trade deal with them, and they are the likely next candidate to be integrated into an expanding NAFTA, and they provide a low-wage, high-skill operating position that is very similar today to what Mexico was like in the 1980s. So basically integrating Colombia into the North American system, because the Mexicans have become too highly skilled. We need something a little bit lower down the network there. And Colombia checks all the boxes. In addition, Colombia is, without a doubt, the most pro-American country in the Western Hemisphere, more so than Mexico or Canada. We have cooperated with them on military matters for decades, going after their drug cartels in a very successful series of operations in the 90s and the 2000s. We worked together to take out, for example, FARC, which is the oldest drug cartel in the world. And we've been supporting their peace process in terms of bringing what's left of the elements of their system into legality and shutting down the drugs forever. The relationship has always been strong, including under Trump's first term. That said, we've had a change in personality relatively recently. It's been a few years. Gustavo Petro, the president, is he's a bit of a grandstander, a bit of a braggart. He tends to favor images over real policy. He thinks of himself as a master negotiator. He wants to rip up everything that any of his predecessors ever touched. He has no problem linking security and trade deals or topics together to get what he wants. He's very belittling of his opponents and thinks of them as enemies. Sound familiar? Sound like anyone you know? So you can see why he and Donald Trump don't necessarily see eye to eye. The single biggest thing that they have that where they're on a different page is that in the American playbook, China's the big bad. In the Colombian playbook, the United States is the big bad. It's an old Latin American story, but it's still a good choice to go after if that's what you want to do. Because while the trade relationship will undoubtedly be a powerful part of the future, it hasn't happened yet. It will take tens, if not hundreds of $billions of investments from both countries to build out the infrastructure, to expand the workforce, and to build the industrial plant. That doesn't happen in a day. That happens in a decade or two. And we are very early in that process, which means that Colombia, the most pro-American country in the hemisphere, but most Americans don't realize that, is actually a really good choice for Donald Trump to prove how tough he can be. Since this news broke just hours ago, Petro has already said that they will take the migrants back. They just need to come on civilian planes. At this point, the ball's in a different court, and that court is Donald Trump's, and we'll see how far he will hit it.
What people don't understand about deportation and deportation flights, especially with the class of people that they are targeting, the worst first, they are very prone to violence on the plane. We have seen many cases of immigrants in deportation flights tearing up the airplane on the inside, attacking ICE agents. And this particular class of people that they're targeting first are, people that have been arrested for crimes already and convicted of crimes. So they're probably even more prone to attacking cops and ripping up the airplanes. So they have to be restrained. Sorry, that's how it works. It's the worst first, but everybody knows that eventually it's going to be just regular non-criminal, illegally present aliens that are going to be swept up. I mean, this is just the opening seconds of the first round of a very long bout that's going to go on for 4 long years. Eventually, the United States is going to get to non-criminal aliens, and they're going to have to find a good way, a cheap way. Cargo planes are much less expensive than chartered aircraft. It's just easier to do it. And by the way, I've been on these cargo planes. They're not that bad. I don't know. I mean, okay, they're not bringing coffee to you and peanuts, but they're not that terrible. And most immigrants have already gone through weeks and months in really rough conditions on the trail. They're no strangers to a little roughness. You're not going to get much sympathy out of me. I've flown on these cargo planes. They're fine.